Welcome to Raise Sensation. I'm your host, Dan, and this episode is going to focus on the book, The Art of Horror Stories, 200 Years of Spine-Chilling Illustrations. This book came out, let me give you a little idea on that, The Art of Horror Stories. This book was originally written in 1976 by a British author. It was published here in the U.S. in 1986 by Chartwell Books, a division of book sales. And what they were was, they were a company that specialized in picking up titles, a lot of British titles, and published them here in the U.S. And they would publish them as special price bargain books, something like that. They don't print any prices on them or anything. And I got this book and some other books by this company at the local bookstore chain, Crown Books. They were a local chain of bookstores here in the DC metropolitan area, and they had a big bargain section, and it had some real remaindered books, bargain books from publishers, but a lot of their titles were these type of books where they had picked up the rights inexpensively. They had them printed up somewhere on the cheap, and they would be sold at a decent price. They were, you probably never saw them here in the U.S. under a higher price, but they were less expensive than the average book there. So anyway, this book is kind of, here's the contents page. There's an introduction. Then it covers Gothic chapbooks and shilling shockers, penny bloods and penny dreadfuls, Victorian sensational fiction, and then it hops from there to the pulp explosion and the legendary weird tales, masters of horror, and a dying tradition, ? So, so it's, the introduction starts off with a little history of printed horror stories, and it has some really great illustrations here. A lot of the stuff here is murder stories. So there is supernatural, but there's also some just general murder stuff. And you can see here, this is not all the earliest stuff. As he's given the introduction, this is from 1940, 1963. But then here he goes to the Gothic chapbooks and shilling shockers. And these are some, there's some claims in here. I don't know of, if this is written in stone or if this was his opinion, if further research has shown something else. But the modern interest in terror or horror fiction owes its origins almost entirely to one work, The Monk, by Matthew Lewis, which was first published in 1796 and called by one critic a mass of murder, outrage, and indecency. The success of this work, despite several attempts to have it banned as obscene, focused attention on the whole world of horrors which awaited writers and his theme of a young monk who becomes obsessed with sex and demonology and eventually sells his soul to the devil. So, sounds pretty good. And here this early illustration I've seen in various forms. I don't, this isn't quite the version I'm used to, but still among the most widely read of all horror novels, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, 1818, was the product of a nightmare the young authoress, she was only 19 at the time, suffered while staying with her lover. This illustration was the front piece for the 1831 edition. The work drew on current scientific interest in the creation of life and has subsequently proved endlessly popular as a source of inspiration in all the branches of literature and entertainment. Quite true. I keep seeing on the internet all this thing about whether Frankenstein is horror or science fiction and why we need to categorize it as one or the other. the usual silly stuff. Here's some reproductions of for the now almost impossibly rare early 19th century Gothic blue books, or shilling shockers, as they were sometimes called, which were the cheap equivalents of Gothic novels. These publications, which varied in size from 36 pages to 72, were often little more than extensively cut and printed versions of the Monk and other best-selling 3-volume works. They earned their name of blue books because of the plain blue wrapper into which the text pages were bound. These pages were printed on rough paper of the kind which clearly shows them to have been the first pulp publications. So, that's a that's a really wild. Now that looks like something Mike Mignola would use for Hellboy. This dog-headed man with a crown of flames. The Specter Brides. Penny Bloods and Penny Dreadfuls. I got a couple years ago there, the Penny Dreadfuls. There was several different books reprinting a bunch of the Penny Dreadfuls at one point. I didn't end up reading a lot of them, but they're interesting. That's a kind of wild cover there. So this is the layout here is, has a little bit of a scrapbookish feel because of the way they treat the illustrations. These are illustrations from Varney the Vampire, which is long before Dracula. He was a vampire out, starred in this book. I shouldn't say long before, but before Dracula. There's Varney the Vampire, and here's horrors of a different kind, not supernatural, but gruesome. Oh, and I like this. This is this story, Wagner the Werewolf, is probably only slightly less famous than Varney the Vampire, and is certainly one of the earliest stories, if not the very first novel in English to deal with the werewolf theme. Wagner is an adventurous young man able to change into a wolf who undergoes a series of supernatural adventures in 16th century Italy. Accompanied by his mistress, a beautiful murderess, Wagner becomes involved with Italian bandits, Turkish invaders, and many others during the course of his exploits. In human form or as a werewolf, he fears neither man nor devil, and he eventually meets a well-deserved end. So, I don't really care for werewolves that are just a regular wolf, but what are you going to do? I'm looking for some other good... This one, an evil monster carries off a young woman. That's all it says. It looks like it's supposed to be an ape of some kind. But, Victorian sensational fiction. And here we get to, these are, it's talking about how, Bram Stoker's Dracula was perhaps the most famous horror novel to be written during the Victorian era, but vampires by and large did not crop up in stories as often as werewolves, which seem to be much more popular. So there's a bunch of, again, they're wolves. There's what looks like a story about a Loch Ness Monster type creature. Those are pretty cool illustrations. A pulp explosion. So we jump up to this pulps already. Look at that. So these are, I do like that wild man looking thing. There's a, ooh. Yeah. Horror stories and science fiction ran side by side in fantastic adventures. A pulp which changed its size and format regularly and is one of the few to have survived to the present day. Well, the present day meaning then. You know, it had survived. It was a digest type of thing, I think, at the very end. But it is no longer. This was back in the 80s, remember? This is great. The Whispering Gorilla. So, like I said, the layout, the way it's cut up and stuff, it looks almost like a scrapbook more than a regular book layout with the illustrations running into each other and stuff. But you know, at the time when I got this book, I had not really seen any histories of horror illustrations. I don't know if there had been any beforehand. I had read some books about the written word history of the stories themselves, but I hadn't seen anything as far as the illustrations go. So this was a great book for me. I was very happy with. Oh, I love this picture too. Yeah, this Matt Fox one, the Wendigo. This I love this illustration. That is so wild. I guess, and even up into this part, he's still considering things where it's just a murder to be part of the horror, which is true. It's true. I prefer a little bit of supernatural element, especially monsters. But a lot of these, be nice if these covers were in color, but you can't have everything right. And then Weird Tales gets its own chapter. That's Margaret Brundage, who's one of my favorite authors of pulp covers. That's a nice cover there. Oh, yes. That's very nice. That's very cool stuff. So anyway, that's a look at this, and then it's as it starts to get more up to date. Yeah, so here's the end of the pulp stuff. There's a Shadow Out of Time, an H.P. Lovecraft story that made the cover. And there's a Virgil Finlay, Color Out of Space by Lovecraft. There's the Reanimator. So, Lee Brown Co. There's been a couple of really hard to find books done of his work. You know, if you get a chance, you should look him up. Very, very interesting artist. I mean, I could say that about a bunch of them, but and there's one of his rare covers. I don't think he got to do too many. There you go. And then here's, it does, all of a sudden at the end, you can tell he's lost interest after the pulps, because then EC Comics and all these, and all the magazines of the late 50s and 60s, he just doesn't really care for those. But there you go. That's a look at the first book I got on the art of the horror stories. There's been several books that have kind of updated this concept that are really, really good and worth looking at. And I think maybe I'll take a look at those. But anyway, that's it for today.